Good evening again. I think this is going to be a really interesting session. We've got an interesting mix of experts to share their thoughts on this important topic. Let me jump right into it. You've all seen their resumes that were provided beforehand. What I'd like to do is just ask them to each introduce themselves, but describe their interests and responsibilities sort of as it relates to cybersecurity, and a little bit of how you're using cyber intelligence. So in no particular order, Shawna, you're here. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Let's try that again. All right. Good evening. I'm Shawna Cox, and I'm a Deputy Chief of Police with the Toronto Police Service. And my current role is I'm in charge of what's called Priority Response Command, which doesn't have a lot to do with cyber, but it kind of does a little bit. So I'm in charge of communications 911, all of the frontline officers who respond to calls for service, the investigative bureaus at our police stations, and court services. But prior to that, I have traditionally been someone that gets given tasks when nobody knows what to do with it. I don't know if there's anyone out here like that, where your boss goes, yeah, there's this thing, can you check that out and tell us what you think? So I've been involved in a few initiatives. About 6 years ago, I was involved in a project called Operation Reboot, which led to a whole bunch of digital and cyber recommendations for our service, and led to the implementation of our cybercrime team, which was the second one in Canada. We were just on the heels of Edmonton, and I can tell you it was a crazy time because there was no case law to go on. You know, people didn't really know what to do when an incident occurred in terms of involving the police. So we were figuring it out as we went along, and it was fantastic and fun. After that, I got involved in a modernization project where I oversaw a number of things, including looking at IT, including cybersecurity for the service. So that's kind of why I'm up here today. And things have evolved in the 5 years since we put the original cybercrime team together, and we can talk about that in a bit. But it's wonderful to be here tonight. It feels a little bit like the dating game up here. It's a bit with the high chairs. And, okay.
That was great. That was great. Well, I am Ali Dehghantanha. I am a professor in cybersecurity and threat intelligence in the University of Guelph. Well, I'm kind of new to Canada. 6 months ago, I was a professor in cyber threat intelligence at the University of Sheffield, UK. And this is my first time being in this hall, in this building, right, all together. My research group and my research interest is mainly focused on building technologies, future technologies in cybersecurity, especially in intersection of artificial intelligence and cybersecurity, cyber threat intelligence. For those of you who are more having link with UK, you may have seen some of our works on using AI for threat deduplication, threat feed deduplication, and identification of threat feed relevance to specific organizations. But I think we'll discuss about these things a lot more today. Yeah, if there is a question. Thank you.
Okay, so it works now. Okay, my name is Farooq Nair. I'm a Chief Information Security Officer with an organization called ORION. For those of you who don't know us, we are the Research and Education Network for the province of Ontario. And the name ORION is an acronym which stands for Ontario Research, Innovation and Optical Network. We provide connectivity to all the universities, colleges, hospitals, school boards, and now research and innovation centers in Ontario. We are also a not-for-profit. Apart from that, in my role at Orion also entails that I'm also a shared CISO amongst 5 universities and 3 colleges in Ontario. So we have a consortium of institutions who we work with. How am I using threat intelligence in my organization? So there's this organization called REN-ISAC, which is a Research and Education Network Information Sharing and Analysis Center based out of in the US, but we get threat intelligence from them. Since we are running a research and education network for the province, we get threat feeds from CSIRC, which is now called the Canadian Centre of Cybersecurity. We have other sources which we get threat intelligence feeds from, like other vendors. I don't want to name them right now, but all the leading vendors in the next-gen firewall space and the security space, we get threat intelligence feeds from them. We are currently also setting up a SOC for research and education institutions in Ontario. We just took the first step towards that, but threat intelligence is going to be an active part of that. So look forward to today's discussion.
a really interesting mix, as I mentioned. On the panel, we've got everything from the real life of going through and setting up a program through to looking to the future, how are we going to use artificial intelligence, and then the actual practical, I'm stuck with all of this, and now what am I going to do it as a CISO? And we're talking about cyber threat intelligence, but I guess the bottom question we've got to start with is, when we're talking about cyber threat, what is it? And do we know when we've got it and how to actually use it? Shawna.
Oh, good, an easy question. You know, I think the interesting thing is the definition of cyber threat is ever expanding. And I can tell you from a policing perspective, people want to think about it as an off the corner of your desk kind of project. And by that I mean they think, oh, it's okay because, you know, the banks will deal with this on their own, or the federal government will deal with it for us. And the fact is, what we're seeing in policing is an integration of what I'm going to call traditional crimes that you experience in real life that we've seen. For example, gangs. So gangs are what I would call a disorganized crime, and yet gangs are moving into cyberspace in ways that would surprise you. And you can get on the dark web and you can buy code and you can buy, you know, information. As you saw tonight, I was actually really excited to see the presentations because it fits very well with what we're experiencing. And so they're not traditional threat actors. The space is becoming really large and broad, and the tactics that we're seeing are more sophisticated. So it really is about trying to navigate a landscape that is changing by the day. So you have your very sophisticated organized crime threat actors that you see doing these very large breaches. We talked, you know, tonight a little bit about, you know, Russia and a little bit about China. That didn't come up a lot, but, you know, you see sort of nation state actors, but then you see, you know, for example, gangs and gang members. And I was at a conference just 6 months ago talking about this and some of the real life cases that we've seen. So when you talk about cyber threats, I don't think people are recognizing them in the integrated way that we're seeing them. The idea of having things happening in real life and digitally at the same time, we tend to still think about it as a very large kind of you know, the threat actors that we're seeing with respect to very large breaches, but it's so much bigger than that. And so, no, I don't think we're identifying them as quickly as we should.
It is very difficult for me as a researcher to define the threat, putting one definition and saying that's the meaning of threat, because threat totally depends on the victim and on the vulnerability. So I mean, that's one of the issues that I see these days a lot in the threat intelligence community in general. Many of the threat feeds or indications of compromise and all these threat outputs that are generated are not relevant to many of the organizations because simply you're not in the interests of those attackers. That's one of the things that I usually start when I'm talking with organizations who like to adopt threat intelligence or any advanced threat detection, threat management solutions, that you first need to know who are your real enemies. Once you understand them, then you can define a proper security protection environment, and then understanding what are the real threats out there. Perhaps your real threat is a disgruntled employee who just has access to your information, but no hacker in Russia, right? And I would say that's probably more relevant to many organizations, small organizations or medium organizations. So I avoid putting one definition for the threat, but I believe that if you could define your threat properly, you can manage your investment and you are actually halfway done with all your cybersecurity requirements. And then you can invest properly on your cyber posture.
So, if I was to define the word threat in simple terms, and just threat, anything which is disrupting my business as usual is defined as threat. Anything which is disrupting that. Now, as Ali mentioned, there are lots of threat intelligence, threat information out there. How do we tackle them? I come from an audit background. I come from a compliance background. And one of the key things which we learned when I was in my audit career was to have a risk-based approach. You cannot boil the ocean. You cannot address every problem. Focus on the things which really matter, things which would actually burn the house down, things which actually matter. Focus on things which you can actually manage. If you cannot manage a problem, you cannot manage the whole thing. So things which are really important, that's the thing. One of the things which we do at Orion, at our organization, is that we are a de facto ISP. I mean, we are a research and education network, but we see millions of events on a network every day. The thing which is very important is that we focus on securing ourselves first. Sharing is important, but first thing is secure ourselves. Second thing is we have defined the events of importance. 10, 15, 5, whatever, we focus on them first. And then we see, okay, we've got playbooks in place, we've got scenarios in place, and just we do tabletop exercises also. But the thing is that things which are really important, like command and control, botnets, ransomware, crypto mining, so just focus on them. And of course, in terms of threat intelligence, the thing which is very important is that I base my threat intelligence on two main things. It should be actionable. The second thing is it should be tactical. If it's missing these two pieces, that threat intelligence is of no use to me.
Farooq, that's a really interesting couple of points there, and I think your push or your comments on the risk-based approach and focusing on what really matters really captures also what Ali was talking about on sort of the victims side of this and their concerns, and also Shawna, what you were talking about on that changing landscape and the cyber criminal. I think all of that fits back into how do we sit down and start to use the cyber threat intelligence that we're getting to make that risk assessment. Farooq, I guess let's take it another step. We're talking about that, and you've described sort of what you want to use it, where you could use threat intelligence. But I guess the question is, are there some barriers to companies actually using cyber threat intelligence? And is there a risk of acquiring too much intelligence and suffering from or leading to data exhaustion? And there was a question earlier from the audience to that point, and I probably stumbled around the answer. So let's hear it from your expertise as a user of threat intelligence.
So I think one thing which is really important to acknowledge is that there is data exhaust. We're getting threat intelligence from feeds from various sources. As I mentioned, you get feeds from ISACs, we get feeds from vendors, we get feeds from the Canadian Centre of Cybersecurity, then we get some feeds from the Treasury Board, the Ontario government also. So I think the first thing which is very important is, as I mentioned, we focus on securing ourselves first. The second thing is that, as I mentioned, if the threat intelligence is not tactical and it's not actionable, it's of no use. The other thing which we also are focusing on is automation. I mean, we have to think smart and act smart also. So whatever automation we can do through threat intelligence feeds, in terms of how we configure and manage our sticks and taxi server, how do we do that? That's also very important. We also use and we also promote using smart analytics tools also in place, using the ELK stack, using other analytics or reportings for the executive management and for the operational team also. Because at the end of the day, it's not about having threat intelligence just for the sake of it. I mean, having half a dozen threat intelligence feeds is not going to protect my organization. What matters is how I'm going to use it and how it can prevent things. And the thing is that the approach which is very important is being proactive. Another element which I think one of the people mentioned in the crowd also is threat hunting and research on the dark web. Bob, you mentioned that we have a Russian translator or somebody who speaks other languages. We need people who can translate Korean language or Mandarin or Russian or other sources, because most of the threat actors come from those regions also. So that's very, very important. So being effective, and of course, the other very important piece about threat intelligence is sharing it with the right people and interacting with the right people. I mentioned REN ISAC. So in the US, there are lots of information sharing and analysis centers, and REN, actually the acronym stands for Research and Education Network. Orion is a member of that, and most of the universities and colleges in Canada and in the US are members of that. We share information on a daily basis. We do pilot projects, we exchange information about threat actors and all that. So The key over here is sharing the right information with the right people and taking action within the right amount of time. So just about doing it right.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's the taking action that's what it's all got to lead to, because if it doesn't go at that end, then there's no point in actually going through and spending the resources to do it. Ali, you mentioned artificial intelligence. So looking to the future, do you see any developments in AI in that domain that you think are going to help companies deal with the issue of cyber threat intelligence?
Sure. I would like to discuss both about the opportunities and the danger, right, of using AI. In presentations and even John presentation, you have heard about using AI for in identification of threats which are duplicated in your environment, or even AI can be used to predict which threat feeds or indications of compromise are relevant to your organization. Well, rule of thumb is AI is good for prediction, not for making judgment, right? So as long as an AI solution is used to just do the prediction, we are fine. So when we are overwhelmed with a lot of data, we can use artificial intelligence to only show relevant graphs to the analysts in the Kibana or in the Elk stack, right? Those are all perfect usage of the AI. One of the participants has mentioned about one of the biggest weaknesses of using threat intelligence for attack identification, and that's the overlooking to the threats from one view only, right? And that's the static view that the threat phase are providing. And currently, even in the University of Guelph, we are building on a multi-view AI-based system for threat analysis. So we are looking for the runtime behavior, even opcodes, binary data, headers, as well as indications of compromise for threat detection and obviously prevention of the attacks. So that would be another development that is going on, and any of you if interested to test our system, let me know. We are more than happy to get test users, right, of course. And it's free of charge, that's university, right? Okay, but putting all these aside, AI offers a lot of dangers as well. You know, artificial intelligence technologies are designed for a stationary environment. So you can perfectly use an AI engine to drive a vehicle as long as the signs are previously known and the behavior of the people are previously defined. But when you look into the cybersecurity, we are dealing with active actors that are learning the behavior of your AI agents. In the more scientific term, this is called adversarial learning, right? I give you an example. Not mentioning the name of the company because there could be some representation from them in the room, but we have used one of the best AI solutions for spam detection that I guess most of you are using every day. And we built an AI agent that only changed 5% of a message which was detected as a spam with synonym words. So the words are totally synonym, just 5% of message. And the same spam detection allows this new message to bypass 80% of time, right? So the moment we are we are acting against an AI agent as an active actor, they quickly fall down. And that's one of the dangers, that whenever you are employing any AI solution, especially if organizations are using out-of-the-shelf AI solutions, meaning the AI solutions that attackers can purchase as well, can have access to, you probably are increasing your risk without even knowing that. And you are shifting the risk from, you may detect those script kiddies and small hacking groups, but those who are serious in using AI, as Rob was mentioning, they are really clever in building adversarial techniques around about the AI solution, making sure that 80% of time they can bypass. So saying all these, it means if you are using AI, make sure that you are behaving AI solution similar to any other solution in the organization. The same way that you are doing the penetration testing or vulnerability assessment of your web application, you need to have similar process for doing an assessment of your AI engines. Once you are there, you are reducing the chance of attackers by passing the AI systems. But again, make sure judgments are made by human beings. Let AI do the prediction, and then you're fine.
Really good point, Ali, that yes, technology can go a long way to help us, but at the end of the story, it still comes down to the human side of it. And I guess that's a really good lead in, Shawna, back into the law enforcement side of it. We've been talking about business using cyber threat intelligence to help themselves, and I suspect that everyone in here thinks that law enforcement's got a huge role in that. So what is the role for cyber threat intelligence for law enforcement? And then the second part of that is, what's the play that can go on between the business community and law enforcement to mutually help one another?
Yeah, so the role of law enforcement is unique, and I would say that because we have powers and capacities that other people don't have, like the ability to get information through an MLAT, which is a mutual legal assistance treaty overseas. Generally speaking, those are post-incident responses. We also, what I find so fascinating, and I wanted to share tonight, is just each of us are plugged into a slightly different ecosystem doing the same thing. So I hear, I know the great work that CCTX is doing. I can tell you from a police agency standpoint, we share extensively with other police agencies in terms of, threats, so that other people can be aware if there's an attack in their area. We are jurisdictionally bound, which is a challenge. At the same time, the universities are sharing information. I get information from agencies in the US, for example, with respect to threat intelligence. We share a limited amount of that through, business pieces that we put out in terms of bulletins, but they're quite limited, again, because they really need to be tactical. And even I find it quite exhausting, all the information that we receive. So I would suggest that you find a way as a business to plug into an ecosystem that is meaningful for you, where you find that it's something that you can use tactically, as you said tonight, and to see what is most helpful to you. Where police can be really helpful is post-incident, and that is where we tend to do most of our work that you see when we come out and actually deal with an issue when it's arisen. The challenge is a lot of times the post-incident response that you engage in to mitigate the threat probably destroys the evidence required to actually move forward with an investigation. But you have to decide what's important to you. Like if you need to stop it and you need to stop it now and there's no time to wait for police, then that's what you need to do. So, police have a role to play pre-incident, even more so post-incident. And we are collaborating with ourselves in policing and somewhat in the business community. But I find it really interesting tonight that everybody is plugging into an ecosystem. And I think there's incredible capacity to be gained by that.
Great. Actually, one of the things that a number of our members have been talking about is that sitting down and running a session with law enforcement so that the business community knows that when they dial 911 cyber, what happens? So what's the expectations on both sides? So what can the business community be doing with law enforcement? What actually happens? What's reasonable to expect from law enforcement? And how the business community can actually help law enforcement so when they walk through the door, they haven't accidentally destroyed the information. It's one thing to make a business decision, but by accident destroying it. So I really look for, there's a lot of collaboration going and starting between law enforcement. So and Toronto Police Service is one of the leaders in doing that. So congratulations going forward with that. So it's a really good program.
What I was going to say is I really loved what Ali said earlier about disgruntled employees. So what I find is a lot of times businesses, particularly small to medium-sized businesses, are focused on these large-scale threats that are occurring in the broader space. And we actually do find that a lot of the cases involve a disgruntled employee, right? Somebody who wants to do damage, somebody who's angry, and the other thing is the human element. Again, because a lot of people are very focused on especially these bulletins you get, and it tells you about the next attack and the way that it's being used, and they forget that things like if you find a fob, or a USB key in the parking lot, like you probably shouldn't plug it into anything because there's still those kinds of social engineering pieces that are so important that get overlooked. The last couple of major attacks that we've seen here in Toronto have all been, people clicking on links that they shouldn't have, that just allow something into the system. Something you think, really? Like, are people still doing that? Yeah, even in large companies where there's been training. So that human element piece and really looking at people that maybe would have done something different, say, 15 years ago, that now have access to cyber as a possibility. The other thing that has surprised me personally is that a lot of people aren't technologically sophisticated that necessarily carry out an attack. They know someone, they buy it online, they get access to what they need online, and particularly in the dark web, it's very easy. Instructions will be sent to you, and you can execute on it. So you think, oh, it couldn't possibly be so-and-so. I mean, what do they know about tech, right? And you really don't need to know much. So you have to look at the human element. Did you want to add anything to that, Bob, with what you've seen?
I mean, I would agree. I mean, this is still a people business. Technology is just a medium. And when you sit down, every time you think about it, there's a person at the other end, either on the attack or is facilitating it out of your organization. It's still people. And you've got to look at it from that perspective. Then look at the technology and then look at the policies and pick and do all three of them. Because as the attackers, they don't care which one of those doors they're going to walk through. You don't look after the people side, you don't look after the policy, you don't look after the technology. They'll just come through whatever's easy. And they're really good at doing it. And the other thing, just picking up your one point on what the criminals are now doing, they're making it really easy for the non-technical person that's really mad at you because they didn't get the promotion or you're firing them, or they're mad because I took my son or daughter to the hospital and I don't think the hospital did what I wanted. You can go online and download the attack tools. They'll walk you through how to do it. If you don't know how to look after the data, they'll store the data for you, they'll sort the data for you, and they'll give you a service guarantee. This is cyber threats, cyber attackers as a business, and that really opens up the potential for a lot of people otherwise doing damage to you that in any other way wouldn't be able to do it. And I think we've got time literally for one question if there's...
One last question.
There's one gentleman over there.
I need like a scooter kind of things.
Hi, thanks. That discussion is really interesting. Other than state actors, how do you deal with non-state actors by, I mean, to me, it would be take money out of the equation. Question is, how does one do that effectively? Or can it be done? So there's no money involved, so there's no gain, at least financially.
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. There's no...
Yeah, I think what you're saying is what's the motivation for attackers that aren't interested in money? So let me give you an example of what's actually taking place now is where the attacks on companies or individuals is actually to discredit them. Up until now, that's been the purview of nation states. They're the ones that do that sort of thing. But now criminals or individuals are now coming after and say, here's a way to really discredit you because I'm mad at you for whatever reason it is, and it only has to make sense to me as the attacker. So that's one category. And the second part are terrorists. So right now, terrorists have only used the internet for things like propaganda, fundraising, and command and control of their operations. What we don't want to do is get to the point where terrorists all of a sudden start to realize that they can make a kinetic attack through a cyber incident. We haven't got to there, but it's a concern, particularly if you look at some of the research that's been done on the number of international terrorists that all have engineering degrees, a real high number of them. But as I say, so far there's a disincentive for the leaders of terrorist organizations to do it. So there's a whole list of organizations or people who are interested in going after and doing cyber attacks that are beyond just the dollars. So in some respects, they're the ones that are easier to understand.